Hello everyone! Before I started the video and got into the subject of it, I wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the artists who had done art for me, either through commissions or gifts. They're very talented and I wanted to at least help them out, get them some exposure. So my most recent Twitter icon change that I really like because of its excellent style is done by Flemkid. You can find him on Instagram. The very talented Gab Sheba did this picture for me very recently, and I really like it. It encapsulates my spirit quite well. Give him a holler, tell him he did a good job. This strutting keyboard sheeb, which I really like, was done by Nyasu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Go to the link. Check that art out. This very stylized and handsome mouse and mouth doggo was drawn by the immensely talented Jagal. Link in the description to their FA page. This totes adorbs portrait style art was done by the very talented Minkies. Or Minkies. I don't know, I never actually asked. But this young artist wanted me to pimp out their YouTube channel where they do more art stuff, so please take a look. This handsome thick doggo was done by a really fantastically talented artist, Orochi. I've linked their Twitter in the description and you can find their other accounts straight from there. Very talented. But thanks for listening real quick, I just wanted to pimp out some profiles, so you talented artists, I hope you get some business from that. Now, the subject matter of this video might leave some of you thinking we are treading yet again upon very familiar ground, but unfortunately, I feel like it's something that needs to be said. You thought the games journalists were done with Cuphead? No. Cuphead is a game that is selling quite well from what I understand. It sold over 120,000 copies on Steam in less than 4 days, and that's just on Steam. In fact, as of October the 6th, it sold over 300,000 copies, and again, that's just on Steam, and it sure isn't hard to see why. An instantly recognizable style. It's a charming and whimsical game with an aesthetic that is a clear homage to the Depression-era 1930s cartoon cinema. But the game's not just getting attention because of its unique art style. The game is getting an immense amount of attention from games journalists because it's a difficult game. And difficult games are problematic. Since its release, and mostly recently, there has been a discussion going on in some circles about, well, inclusion, exclusion, difficulty, entitlement, and the, well, let's just call it the hypocrisy of the people who make certain statements regarding it, but we'll get to that soon. By none other than Ben Kuchera himself. When is exclusion a valid design choice? The difference between what you earn and what you're owed. So put on your thinking caps, ladies and gentlemen, though some might consider this overkill. This is Ben Kuchera after all. And let's delve into the idea that maybe video games just might not be the thing for you. Video games are not like many other kinds of media. Video games are interactive by nature. They require your input. They require your skill to get the full effect. Really, to get basically any effect. This is different from movies that are passive. You put the movie on the screen, the movie plays regardless of whether you're even there. You could die and the movie would complete itself. This should be a well-understood fact by everybody, even if they haven't thought about it specifically. Everyone knows it to be true. It's one of the reasons that walking simulators only cater to a certain audience, because some people just want to be grabbed. Step into the dojo, Winston. But games are very similar to many other forms of media in the fact that they're sort of open for everyone to try. A movie can be purchased and played by anybody. The amount of enjoyment and the amount of thrill that you get out of that movie is completely subjective and is based on individuals and how they perceive the content inside, how much they like it, how much it grabs them, how much it challenges them. There's a myriad of variables that can go into that. Everybody can play StarCraft. Not everybody will enjoy it or like it, and that's not the game's fault. Not everybody will play Overwatch and be good at it or like it. In fact, Overwatch is a fantastic example. It's a game that's hard to just pick up and be good in. The skill that you have from other games doesn't necessarily translate immensely well into Overwatch based on how the characters behave and how they perform individual actions. The amount of time you want to put into it and the amount of practice that you want to put into it is mostly up to you and your level of determination and your level of, well, caring. It's important that we set all this up before we get into the article itself and the others that were made about Cuphead, its difficulty, and the question of inclusion and difficulty. So what does the article say here? When is exclusion a valid design choice? Always is the answer. Exclusion is always a valid design choice if that's what the creator wants in their work. It is perhaps paramount that we do not stifle the creative decisions of those who do the creating. Ultimately, their work is the lifeblood of the industry. I'm not saying that we should give free passes no matter what developers do, but what I am saying is that we should hold up on a pedestal their ability to create the kinds of things that they want to create. It's strange that when we look at a success like Cuphead, when so many people buy it, when so many people love it, when reviews for it have been glowing across the board, gaming journo keyboard warriors are quick with their articles, bitching and boo-hooing over an issue that gamers could care less about. Ben even starts his article by saying that Cuphead is a very challenging game in ways one can argue are both good and bad. His first sentence links to Polygon's review of Cuphead made by Chris Plant. And how does Mr. Plant begin his review? By saying that Cuphead is unexpectedly accessible. And I would agree entirely. I think that its difficulty has been overblown, if anything else. It's a game that anybody can play. I would never say don't buy a game, even if they told me they were afraid of its difficulty. Because like he says in the review, it's not really punishing. And it's not punishing at all. If anything, it's a game that encourages be persistent, persevere, and try again. But despite Chris Plant saying very plainly that it's not particularly punishing and it's even unexpectedly accessible, Ben is going to be here to ask us a very simple question. So Ben says, let's ask another serious question that's at the heart of the rather nasty conversation that has sprouted up again due to the game's difficulty. And even I have contingents with him saying that there's been a nasty conversation sprouting up. I mean, this is a product of your own game journalist design. Are you owed the act of finishing a game because you bought it? The answer is no. Now we can't just end things there, can we? I'm not known for disappointing people with my length. Movies are passive. You could die in the middle of a film and it will finish itself. I almost ate a chocolate bar when I went to go see Where the Wild Things Are. Ben Kuchera says it's not as silly a question as it sounds at first. Video games are only one of the only means of expression where you have to pass some sort of test before seeing the rest of what the experience has to offer. Ben, that's what some people would say the experience is, the overcoming of the challenge, the knowing that you're earning the end. But a game asks you to get good enough at whatever challenges it offers before you can see the whole thing. You will be tested, and only those who have earned the higher levels through completing those tests will ever see them. Imagine thinking this is the problem. It's strange that hearing from a video game journalist this is a problem when isn't the appeal of video games the fact that it's about overcoming challenges and obstacles? It's about defeating the enemies on the screen. It's about triumphing over the challenge that's presented to you. This is the appeal of video games. This is why multiplayer games are so immensely popular. It's fun to play against other people, and doubly so when you are satisfied with your performance. It's immensely gratifying to do well in video games when you fight against other players. Spirit of competition and all that. It feels good to do your best and to triumph. Gamers are constantly seeking ways to challenge themselves, and they decide how much that challenge is, and they decide how they're going to overcome those challenges, based on how skilled they think they are, or how much they care about the game, or how casually they want to play. And that's why there are so many games that are considered casual games, and so many games that are considered hardcore games. Gamers already have distinctions between which games are easy and which games are difficult, and everyone knows that beating the Call of Duty single player and beating the Dark Souls single player is not exactly the same thing. Not all games are created equal. In fact, a lot of people consider games like Dark Souls to, well, it's almost like it's their identity, it's their charm, it's their attraction, which is in the difficulty. These games don't restrict anybody from playing them. They're about getting good. I think Ben has an issue here with recognizing perhaps what is the biggest appeal of games, especially single-player games like Cuphead, because it is so, well, topical. There's a reason a lot of gamers don't play walking simulations. There's a reason a lot of gamers just don't like games that are too passive in their nature. Let's take Hellblade for instance. This illustrates how different gamers buy and play different games and why they do. When I started playing Hellblade, I wasn't really in it for the challenge. I wasn't in it for the combat. I wasn't in it for the action. What I saw in this game was a beautiful, gorgeous, and interesting world with a strange premise, one I've never seen before, one that was interesting, one that I wanted to explore. I wanted to feel like I was going on a journey. I was exploring a character's psyche, that I was living this journey and adventure that they were having and seeing her struggle and overcome her obstacles. Gamers choose what kind of games they want to play, and they know why they get those games. Sometimes people buy games because they want to be challenged and they like when things are difficult. And sometimes people want to hear a story. Sometimes they want to be there, almost as a passenger, or helping or guiding a character to whatever ends that they need. The end of a journey, the discovery of something, self-betterment, enlightenment, whatever it is. Hellblade was that kind of a game for me. It was about me going with Senua on a journey. And then some games are like Overwatch, where you shoot arrows at people. And it's hard, because other people don't want you to shoot arrows at them. And those are people, they're not computers. Since gamers choose what they do and do not want, and what isn't important for them to do, it's probably not the best idea for someone to say, well, a developer should make this in their game so that people who don't want to buy it for that reason will now buy it for a completely different reason. Ben says, which is why so many hardcore gamers are aghast at the idea of games like Cuphead offering an easy mode or an option to skip the boss fights. Ultimately, I think that this is an idea that Ben puts forth that doesn't exist, at least in part. I don't think gamers have a problem with games featuring an easy mode. It doesn't take anything away from somebody's experience if they play a game on easy and I play it at normal or hard. But Ben, you're saying that a game about fighting bosses needs to have a button that instantly skips the bosses. Easy mode, sure, fine, whatever. The whole allure of a game is overcoming the challenge and progressing. It's the knowing that you don't just get free stuff handed to you. You have to actually go and earn it. And it's not like people are saying video games these days are too difficult. I'm not being hyperbolic, I swear, when I say that I cannot recall a game that I did not finish because it was too difficult. In fact, I'm relieved when I find a game whose regular difficulty that the developers present as the default does challenge me. Why do you think I'm not making so many videos the last week or so? Because fucking Divinity Original Sin is soaking up my time, and Overwatch is soaking up my time. I like to be challenged in these ways. We see this in games and movies all the time when a sequel pretty much completely eradicates everything that made its predecessors great or what gave it its character and appeal. Dead Space is a fantastic example. The first Dead Space was scary. It had its tough bits, and Dead Space 2 was a fairly good sequel to what was supposed to be a scary space science fiction-y game with zombies from another universe or whatever. Then EA's sequel to that, Dead Space 3, while not a bad game at all, took what gave the first Dead Space game's character and said, you know what, we're just not gonna have these things anymore. And they wondered why it generally wasn't really looked upon well by a lot of people. Because people played Dead Space for the horror and the space. And while Dead Space 3 had space in it, yeah, but it didn't have horror. They took something, and in order to water it down, in order to make it more accessible and inclusive to everybody, they kind of ruined the premise of what it was and what got attention in the first place. Dragon Age Origins is another example. First, let's take Dragon Age. Dragon Age is a fantastic example. Fuck you, Genji. Dragon Age Origins is one of my favorite games ever. It was difficult. It had hard parts to it. But it was unique. It took a level of thought and strategy to play the game. It often encouraged you to have multiple playthroughs with different character builds and different characters entirely, and there were multiple endings. And then they took the sequel and said, all right, well, let's just turn this into a very light strategy, mostly action game that you can breeze through without really any difficulty at all. And gamers wondered why it was so garbage in comparison to the game that gave it its identity. We see that in Mass Effect to a degree as well. an RPG that takes place in space that has shooter elements to it. And the Mass Effect 2 comes out and is like, you know what? What we need to do is we need to take away what made Mass Effect really, really good gameplay-wise and just, keep the setting and the characters. It is now a bland third-person shooter. It's much, much easier. We've taken the challenge away. It's so much more inclusive. As a result, the game loses its flavor. It loses its individuality. It just becomes some other lukewarm addition to someone's video game library, maybe, if they buy it, if they care. I mean, ask yourself where BioWare is right now. But, Ben, let's be honest here. Do you think that it's really the quote-unquote hardcore gamers that are aghast at the idea of an option to skip the boss fights in a game about fighting bosses? And as your highlighted text there says, if you're not good enough to finish that level, that's right, you don't deserve to see the next one. You don't deserve to beat the game just because you bought the game. Ben goes on and says, and that's the problem here, isn't it? The difficulty will turn off some people, and those people will never get to see that art. They will never enjoy those animations. The design of the game itself keeps them out, when the addition of an easy mode or an option to skip the bosses would allow everyone to see as much or as little as they want. Ben's making a rather odd argument here. What he's saying is the fact that people won't be able to experience what it is, but the experience is supposed to be, by its very nature of being a video game, one that is hands-on, one that requires your input. It's not passive of an experience. And if the only thing that you want from, in this example, Cuphead, if the only thing that you want from Cuphead is to look at the aesthetic, to enjoy that, if that's all you want, then why are you even buying the game at all? When you could watch somebody else play it, when you could go on the internet and simply look at other people's gameplay. In fact, it seems like you're getting a really crappy deal if you buy the game at all, when you can get everything you want from just watching somebody else play it. It's entirely 100% possible for you to get everything aesthetically out of Cuphead without you paying a single dollar to the developers. Maybe it's lost on Ben, the idea that people play games for the challenge, and if people didn't want the challenge and they wanted something more passive, they wouldn't waste their money by buying the game and having to overcome the challenges. They could just look at the art. And if your response to this is, I want this kind of aesthetic, and I want this kind of gameplay, and I'm going to go online and write articles and make tweets and formulate arguments based off of what other people should be doing, maybe you need to be the one making those games. There's no obstacle between you and doing that. You live in a capitalist country, Ben. You can take the risk to make whatever game you want. You can make the easiest, most beautiful platformer boss rush game in the universe, and you could see, is this something that people want? Maybe that's an experiment that you need to do, Ben. Let's see if you can make a game that's so easy to use that an inebriated Helen Keller could finish it. A game that has no challenge and completely removes itself from the allure of being difficult almost exclusively, even though Cuphead is not an exclusively difficult game. Cuphead is selling extremely well. This is clearly what people want, and they're voting with their money, voting with their dollars, that it is something that they want. And it's being reviewed and rated extremely high as well. Again, this is clearly something people not only want, but that they really like. It's a successful idea. And Ben, I think your idea is 17 different kinds of retarded, but I do believe that your heart is in the right place. I think you just want more people to be able to experience more games. I think your solutions are dumb. But again, I believe that on the inside you think that you're doing something that will be good for gaming. And I disagree with that. Let's take a detour, though, over to Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Rock, Paper, Shotgun is quickly becoming one of my favorite gaming journalism publications. For all the wrong reasons. Let us thus examine Exhibit A by a Mr. John Walker. Who is John Walker, many of you might be asking? And that's a fair enough question. I didn't know either. Would you like me to tell you? Because I think you will love to know who this gentleman is. Well, John Walker is the senior editor at Rock, Paper, Shotgun. Anyone who ever uses the word gameplay needs to seriously consider their life choices. Now, Frank Van Hoof has an excellent definition of gameplay, the interaction between the player and the different game mechanics. That sounds pretty solid to me. I think a lot of people could get behind that. But I think a lot of people would get behind that even if they didn't know the definition in the first place, because when you say gameplay, it's almost universally understood by gamers just exactly what you're meaning. Our definitions might be not exactly word for word identical to one another, but we all know basically what you're talking about. That's why gameplay is so ubiquitous in gaming-related conversations. But this is so weird. When I went to Rock Paper Shotgun, where he's a senior editor, none of these reviews, starting at Cuphead and going back in the past, none of these reviews contained the word gameplay. Each individual article, Control F gameplay, show me the money. But the only times it ever popped up were by users in user comments. I think it's strange that in 15 gameplay reviews, sorry, I didn't say game reviews, that word isn't used. I can't imagine. Like I said, it's a ubiquitous word. Whenever you're talking about games and gaming, it pops up all the time. Everybody knows what it means. It's such an easy-to-use word that everyone understands. I think somebody would have to go out of their way to make sure that this word isn't used. And people say, Rags, why do you even care that they didn't use a particular word? Well, it's not the use or the lack of use of the particular word in and of itself. There's nothing wrong with a sentence or a paragraph because it doesn't have the word gameplay in it. But John Walker is clearly showing some level of disdain towards people who use the word gameplay. He's upset, and he's concerned that this is a word that's even used by the general gaming population that's practically universally understood, I would say. We live in an industry. We have a level of culture based around our common technological hobby, video games, where we don't need to be in the business of driving down that tip of the wedge in between gamers and games journalists even further. And when we have games journalists like John Walker, the senior editor at Rock Paper Shotgun, saying things like, if you use gameplay, that's bad, and there's something bad about you for doing it, what an arbitrary and strange hill to stake your flag down onto. Of all positions to take, and in all places, this is where you drive your banner into the earth. How strange is that? Additionally, at the time that I did the searching, the last 8 articles that they had posted did not contain the word gameplay either. How interesting that is. And how authoritarian must one be to take a completely normal and average word that everybody understands and knows and, well, strike it from the digital lexicon of video game journalism? These are the kinds of people who have upper echelon positions in video games journalism, and it just goes to cement the idea that, well, gosh, how much do they really know about video games either? Wait, where was I? Oh, yes, right. John Walker. Now Ubisoft has opened the door. Can we have our skip boss fight button? Ladies and gentlemen, this is a real thing by the senior editor at Rock Paper Shotgun video game journalism publication. Can we have our skip boss fight button? Wait, what's that? You think that people who are in charge of making the reviews and making discussions about video games in the industry and ideally holding them accountable for the things that they do to the consumers, do you think that they should have to play the games before they review them and that they should know about the source material of what they're writing about? Well, I don't know, you're a something Gamergate alt-right, Donald Trump misogynist Gamergate. But this is the world that we live in. No jokes, just sadness. Gee, I wonder why gamers are more and more turning away from video game journalists and are instead turning towards YouTubers and independent bloggers that they prefer and that they can trust. It's probably crap like this article, John Walker, that you spewed out of Lord knows which orifice. But this plague-level case of text-based diarrhea is as real as they come, made with the utmost sincerity. So for those of you not in the know, Assassin's Creed the next one has Discovery Tour as a mode. This removes all the combat, removes the challenge, and it lets you just, dick around ancient Egypt looking at stuff. And that's fine. By me, that's fine. So recently, I got the Great Courses Plus, and I finished up a lecture series, 48 lectures by Professor Bob Breyer on ancient Egypt. And it was fascinating. I learned a bunch. It was like 24 hours worth of listening to someone talk about Egyptian history and culture and the characters involved and the politics of everything and the religion and all that. It really was interesting stuff. Egypt is fascinating. If anybody's on the fence about trying the Great Courses Plus, I know Lindy Beige has like a link in his description for a free month. You should seriously take a look at it. It makes you smart. I love to listen to this stuff while I'm playing games and stuff, kind of absorb what I can. And I don't have to disclose anything because I don't have any deal with them. I've never talked to them. I'm just saying that as someone who plays video games a lot, this is a great way for me to enjoy a hobby that's, hands-on and at the same time absorb a lot of information in the background about, whatever topic I want to learn about. We've often heard people talking about the educational qualities that video games could bring to the table, and I feel a mode like this just might be the thing to really get a lot of people interested in things they didn't know they might be interested in. The interactive and immersive nature of video games make it a prime tool to teach people about history in ways that a textbook or a classroom couldn't. John Walker, however, does not make the educational argument that I would. And even from my perspective, it's easy to say, well, you can have those things in the real game too. What senior editor John Walker says in his article is that the skip boss fight is a totem for my larger point here. It's the spirit such an option captures, and it's one that I think the industry would do well to breathe deeply into their souls. Yeah. And he put it in italics to make sure he super duper serially means it. Let other people play games their way. I mean, yeah, some people out there want to play Super Mario without the jumping. And who is Nintendo? And who are you as someone who plays games to tell them that they have to jump in a Super Mario game? You should let them play the game their way. I mean, why would you even want to have combat in a series that has been about combat, a series whose name is Assassin's Creed? I mean, can you believe all those gamers out there who think you shouldn't remove the core fundamental pillars of what makes a game a game? Why can't they be more inclusive? John Walker in his article does speak about inclusivity, saying that gaming has always been inclusive. And Walker is correct in saying that games have always been inclusive, but not at all in the way that he writes down here. You see, gaming is inclusive because everybody has to follow the same rules. Gaming is inclusive because everybody who starts to play a game agrees by participating to follow the same set of rules and guidelines. Anybody could sit down at a mouse and keyboard and play regardless of your age, your race, your gender, any of that stuff. Nobody is excluded from taking part, and nobody is excluded from making the attempt. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that anybody is owed victory. This is the single-player equivalent of, well, if not everybody wins in the end, it's not really inclusive, because not everybody can be winners. And that's just an unfortunate fact of life, John. And ultimately, those are the same thing. If you think that games should include modes without combat and without challenge, what you're saying is that everybody who buys that game should be entitled to completion of the game regardless and without any challenge at all. Well, what about multiplayer games? If I buy a multiplayer game, then I'm entitled to be victorious and have all the content. I bought the game, I deserve to win. After all, locking victory behind a skill wall, well, that's not very inclusive, is it? The problem is, once we start handing out participation trophies to people, which we already do to some degree, but at least handing out victory ribbons to people who don't deserve it, it dilutes the satisfaction that comes with actually winning the game. And I know it's been said ad nauseum at this point, but the challenge is the appeal. Now, the continuity of this video is going to be a little odd because I'm putting up an image that says Cuphead Race has passed 1 million sales in just 2 weeks. I've been in this strange creative slump. But now that I'm finally out of it, reading headlines that talk about Cuphead's amazingly good sales, especially because it's an indie game, well, that makes me think, how inclusive is this game really? Who is it excluding? Who can't play it? Who can't enjoy it? Cuphead is sitting extremely high on reviews pretty much across the chart and is rated extremely highly by users as well. Do you think that gamers would be praising the game, which is essentially a big boss rush game, if they had the ability to just skip bosses whenever they felt like it? The overcoming of these obstacles is the appeal of the game. It's why people like it, because it's challenging. It's the reward of beating those challenges that drives people to keep playing and keep buying games of this nature. In any event, it makes me a little melancholy to know that John Walker, the senior editor at Rock Paper Shotgun, is the one who's saying that we should just be able to skip bosses and that games should have no combat modes. And ultimately, any kind of challenge should be completely stripped from games because some people out there might not have what it takes to beat them. I mean, really though, the natural extension of this is why should any sort of reward be meritorious in a game? I mean, it's in the game. You should have it. It should be yours. That's simply the natural next step in the progression of where this mindset leads us. How come I'm not entitled to the trophy for beating the game if I haven't beaten the game? If your mindset with the video game is that any challenge that's in the game isn't inclusive by its very nature and that you should be able to simply remove any obstacle in your way, well, first off, the natural question people arrive at is why play games at all if that's your attitude? If every obstacle can be circumvented with a simple button press that doesn't necessarily help you but instead simply removes the challenge, period, why bother? But if that's the attitude that you have in video games, then the next step, as I said, is why take any reward in video games and restrict any player from ever accessing them? One of the reasons that victory is something that people want so much is because not everybody can have it, because you have to work for it. It's not owed to you. You have to go out there and you have to get it. You have to fight. Even aesthetic rewards, like, remember the katana from Halo 3? I think you had to get 1,000 gamer score, and I think later they changed it to where it was easier to get. But man, I got that katana, and I was proud that I got it. Because not everybody was good enough at Halo to get the katana. It was hard to do. It took dedication and perseverance, and it took an amount of skill to get. And so the people that you saw who had the katana, you could look at them and say, wow, that guy's good at Halo. That guy, he knows his stuff. He knows what he's doing. But if they just handed out that katana attachment to everybody in the game, it would lose its allure, and as a result, it would lose half of its reason for even being there. Who cares about it if everybody could have it? Its difficulty to acquire made it that much more satisfying to show off. Resident Evil 4 is a classic example. When you beat the game, which was no easy feat necessarily, you had the option to buy some guns with infinite ammo, the rocket launcher, and the Chicago typewriter. Better reloads with a trench coat. By beating the game, you could appreciate how difficult it was and how challenging some sections could be. You would be able to understand that having an infinite ammo rocket launcher or an infinite ammo, damn near insta-kill submachine gun at your disposal, you never had to reload or stop firing, you would realize how easy that would make the game. You would be able to appreciate it more because you knew what it was like to beat the game without these tools at your disposal. And sure enough, on Rock, Paper, Shotgun, Matt Cox decides to make this exact argument. Why Cuphead Simple Mode shouldn't cut content. Because it's not enough that a game that sells itself largely on the premise of it being difficult, it's not enough that such a game has an easy mode. That game needs to have an easy mode, and the easy mode should include everything that the game has to offer. There should be no extra rewards, and there should be no extra incentive to beat this game on a hard or normal difficulty. Matt Cox's article begins by referencing his review of the game, where he says, I praise the inclusion of a much easier simple mode that also strips out some of the game's content. Even though in the review, Mr. Cox says about the boss fights, they're all bloody difficult, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Which I guess isn't true, because he would rather have it another way. And in that review, he says that simple mode is far from the full experience, because it's supposed to be the easy mode. And the way that Cuphead uses its easy mode is that it simplifies the boss fights. They don't do certain attacks, they don't have certain transformations. That's the price you have to pay for getting an easy mode in a boss rush game. There are less things to hit your character. The enemies make less attacks, they make less transformations, it's easier for you. At this point, now we're getting to it's not the right kind of easy. Killing Floor 2 is another example of a game that does this. In Killing Floor 2, as the difficulty increases, enemies do different attacks and they have different abilities at their disposal. This makes the game more difficult because enemies have more tricks up their sleeve to kill the players. Rocket launching enemies, they have flamethrowers, or they can explode when they're near death. Enemies move and attack in different ways that make it more difficult for you to land headshots on them. The argument is that easy mode should have all of the same rewards that come with beating the game on normal or difficult. I mean, if I buy Resident Evil 4, then how come I don't have everything unlocked from the get-go? Why would you lock all these rewards behind the fact you have to beat the game? Not everybody is good enough to beat Resident Evil 4. It's not very inclusive of them to say you have to beat the game before you're allowed to buy the infinite ammo rocket launcher. If I'm not good at the game, I should just get an infinite ammo rocket launcher. That would make things so much more simple. That would be so much more inclusive. I mean, granted, the entire point of these weapons and the allure of these weapons would be basically gone, but I mean, it would be so much more inclusive. The idea that nothing should be cut ultimately undermines the entire point of the rewards. Not only that, but the appreciation you get for having infinite ammo weapons after you understand how difficult the game is, it makes them all the more satisfying. In his article, he says in simple mode in Cuphead, the bosses have much less health, but also have some of their attacks removed. It takes away entire stages from each fight, meaning players don't get the opportunity to appreciate the full inventiveness of every boss design. Well, yeah, Cox, yeah. That's what happens when you get an easy mode. They remove things, they remove obstacles, so it's easier for you to beat. And if your primary concern is being able to appreciate the full inventiveness of every boss design, then you should just go and look them up. If your concern is not, I should practice and get better so that I can defeat the game and see these things while I play the game, then you don't need to play the game. You can just go to the Google, to the YouTube, and you can look up all this stuff, and you can see somebody else do it, and you can appreciate all the art with having to worry about you needing to practice or get better. If you remove the challenge from the game, then why even bother? Matt Cox, later in the article, says, after talking about the Discovery Tour mode that removes all challenge from Assassin's Creed Origins, he says, there's a strong case behind it. The best game design, in my view, is the one that provides the largest net total of happiness. I shit you not, this is what he says. He says, I diverge a bit from John Walker and think that if all of Cuphead's content was accessible to everyone, then the happiness of the minority that previously had exclusive access to it would be reduced. But it's hard to see how this wouldn't be offset by the added enjoyment that everyone else would get. Holy fucking shit, these are games journalists. Welcome to 2017. The best game design, in my view, is the one that provides the largest net total of happiness. This is the mindset of the people who are writing for gaming journalist publications. This is why gamers don't like you. This is why gamers laugh at you. This is why doggos on the internet have to make videos about you and your foolishness. I mean, do I really need to unpack why this is retarded? Yes, I do. I'm going to. I feel like I have to. I have to get it off my chest. First off, this means that Dark Souls wouldn't be a thing. You wouldn't have games like Dark Souls. You wouldn't have hard games. You wouldn't have games that appeal to niche markets. Horror games? Well, those aren't very mainstream. Some people might be too afraid to play horror games. We better dial down how scary these games are. Some people just can't handle it. If you're too scared, you should just be able to press a safety button and it instantly whisks you away past the monsters and past the dark corridors, and you should be into the next safe house. But now more people will be able to play the game without being scared. The less spooky a game is, the more people can play it, the more accessible it becomes for everybody. Yeah, never mind the whole point of the game being scary is non-existent now. What's most important is that the more gamers can play it. It's more accessible, it's more inclusive, nobody will get scared now. And you could kiss meritorious rewards in video games goodbye. Just because you're skilled, just because you're good at games, you think you should get extra rewards to show off your prowess? Well, that's not very inclusive. If we gave those rewards to everybody, then there would be a net total increase of happiness from gamers. That's way better from a design perspective. No rewards for being good at games. What? You have to get 100 kills with a weapon to unlock some attachment for it? Well, attachments for weapons, those aren't very friendly to people who aren't good enough to get them. We need to remove unlocking attachments from the game. You should start with every attachment for every weapon. No more unlocking camos, no more unlocking skins, no more unlocking weapons, no more unlocking attachments. The fact that you have to earn any of these things in a game means that less people have the ability to enjoy having them after all. That's the Matt Cox logic we get. It's much better that 1,000 people who buy a game because it's really difficult, no, it would be better if they didn't get the game. It would be better instead if 10,000 people bought the game, even though it's so easy that anybody can beat it, and the whole point of the game, its whole premise, being a difficult game and having challenges not everybody can overcome, well, that doesn't matter. What matters is now more gamers can play it. No. Gamers could play it all. It's about beating the game. Now more players can beat the game. Granted, the whole point of the game is that it was challenging and not everybody can beat it, and that it was obstacles that were supposed to be tough, that required you to practice. It doesn't matter. It's better to have a super easy game that 10 gamers can beat than having a difficult and challenging game that only 5 gamers could beat. Matt Cox, I want you to stay as far away from game design as is humanly possible. In the article itself, you even say that you understand the whole premise was that there is a feeling of being special and a feeling that if not everybody can beat the game, you're particularly skilled in something because you were able to overcome those challenges. You understand that's the argument. You ask, why exactly might the happiness of that original group be decreased? I can think of 2 reasons. 1, they would no longer feel special, and 2, the actual experience would feel less rewarding because it could, with a flick of the difficulty setting, have taken less effort to get there. You even write it out. Feeling special is part of the joy behind finding a secret or chancing on some rare loot where exclusivity plays a role in their value. But you fail to associate value of the exclusivity of overcoming the challenge with victory over the game. If everybody can beat the game, Matt, then what's the point? If you walk into every scenario and every challenge knowing that there is no possible way for you to fail, then why bother? Just tell yourself you would have beaten it anyway and save yourself the money. He says what stops that from being a compelling argument is that we're talking about exclusivity of a different, more total kind. Rare loot and hidden secrets are side dishes, while Cuphead takes away part of the main meal. Entitlement of the highest caliber, I say. Matt thinks that gamers should be owed victory over the entire game if they dial down the difficulty. They should be owed the chance to beat the game and have access to all the content, when the whole point is working to get it. Matt then goes on to say that the experience of finishing a game can be more rewarding when he knows that there was an easy option, but he chose not to take it. And that part is fair enough, and I understand where he's coming from there, but then Matt Cox goes on to say that not everybody's mind will work that way, and if an all-access easy mode can increase the enjoyment of both people that don't want to challenge and a subsection of those that do, it starts to look like a no-brainer. Matt Cox of Rock Paper Shotgun. If people don't want a challenge, don't play video games. They are not made for you. They are not designed for you. The only games that have no challenge are the ones designed for infants and small children who have not come to terms yet with their own emotional stability that they cannot fathom the idea of a fail state. Matt, I don't want video games to pander to people who don't want to be challenged. That's the whole point. Video games are interactive. They require you to overcome an obstacle through skill or perseverance. Challenge is intrinsic to the medium, Matt Cox. Do not cater to people who do not want that experience. And don't devalue the rewards of victory and then tell people that, oh, you'll like it better if people play on easy modes and then they get everything that you get for beating it on hard or normal. Don't tell gamers that it'll be the same thing, because it won't. There is value in the exclusive nature that not everybody can beat every game. Gaming as a hobby has been this way since its inception and has continued to grow and blossom into fruition ever since. Let's take a look at games that are mobile, games that are designed for children, games that are designed for people who don't want to put up with challenge, but instead just want to be rewarded with things. This is a cancerous attitude, and we see this in mobile gaming, and we see those trends in mobile gaming slowly starting to leach their way into what we consider hardcore gaming, consoles, PCs, that sort of thing. What mobile games started to do is they started to cater to people who weren't really interested in the challenge of video games, and so what happened as a result? Well, Instead of practicing and getting better, what we'll do is we'll say, hey, just buy these upgrades and you can overcome any obstacle. It's like an easy button you can press. It just takes money to press the button. Or let's take it one step even further. Let's make the game so difficult that it practically requires for you to get microtransactions in order to beat them. Let's make the game so difficult that you have to pay money. Let's make the wait so long that you have to pay money. If you sell to audiences who are not interested in overcoming challenges through practice or through any other regular means, then what they'll do is they'll make games that are riddled with microtransactions as a substitute. Because this is what happens when you market games to people who are not interested in actually being challenged. The easy modes and the shortcuts will have price tags attached to them. Think of how inclusive it is when you can go ahead and spend $5 to get 1,000 gold pieces or 30 magic ketchup packages or whatever they sell in games these days. Now everybody can buy victory. Matt Cox, in his article about why Cuphead Simple Mode shouldn't cut any content, goes on to say that the problem is that for every person that does end up playing on the harder difficulty and enjoying themselves, there will be many other people who never try it or lose interest in advancing when they do. He says the decision to cut content only makes sense then if the total enjoyment of people who do shift towards regular difficulty is greater than that of the much larger number of people who would get to see everything that the game has to offer through a full content easy mode. The sentiment isn't new. This is typical. Game journalists know how to make video games better than the people who make the video games. They know everything, they have all the answers, and despite the fact that this game has sold over 1 million copies in just 2 weeks, that's not fucking good enough. The game is too hard. Game journalists tend to be under the impression that a game owes you something. And sometimes it does. It owes you to not false advertise and stuff like that. You know, basic consumer rights. Game journalists need just to band together and create this perfect mega game since they all apparently have the answers collectively. The whole gist of this article is that developers need to make the games that I want to see. Developers should make more content that doesn't match their creative vision because it's all about the general audience. It's all about the amount of people they can get playing their game. Appealing to niche markets and having a specialized sort of appeal, none of this matters. And I say specialized sort of appeal, but 1 million sales in 2 weeks for an indie game? Maybe not so specialized. Well, maybe that's not so specialized and niche after all, huh? These kinds of articles are just the ones that make gamers feel like games journalists are an outsider to the industry, an outsider to the hobby, like they're peering in, like they don't really know what gamers want or care about. I get the impression from reading this article that Matt Cox is somebody who isn't a gamer. He's on the outside of the industry, looking in, seeing a game that looks particularly interesting to him, and then saying, it needs to change to appeal to me. And the appeal of the game as it was designed by the developers be damned. Late to the party like I am, admittedly, GameSpot came up with this gem, the problem with difficulty in video games, with the subheader, do game developers understand difficulty? Fuck off, GameSpot. Of course developers fucking understand difficulty. And it just so happens that GameSpot and Polygon and Rock Paper Shotgun, all these game journalist publications just happen to come out with all these articles, and they're the only ones, by the way, bitching about this, about how games are too hard, and that they need to be dumbed down and simplified so that everybody can play them. I swear these people are in the wrong industry and they need to go write about something else like throw pillows or scented candles. GameSpot had that accompanied by the YouTube video, The Problem with Difficulty in Video Games. Because game journalists refuse to understand the strange concept that difficulty is part of the developer's vision. But we game journos, we have to band together and all make articles about Cuphead being difficult even though players love it, and the game is selling like hotcakes despite being only an indie game. We need to let the world know where Cuphead is a failure and why it needs to be more inclusive for everybody. The true measure of Cuphead's success isn't in its sales, and it isn't into the market that it caters to, it isn't to the challenge and the allure that comes with the difficulty. No, no, no. What matters is that it's not inclusive enough. Not everybody can pick up this game and beat it like it's our favorite walking simulator fill in the blank, so obviously it's got some work to do. And if you go to all these articles, and if you go to all these videos and read the comment sections from, gamers who play games, they're all almost the same across the board. You keep hearing the same comments over and over. You need to get good. You need to practice and get better at the game. The game isn't designed to cater to every single person. The game isn't even that difficult anyway. Stop trying to socially engineer gaming. And a lot of different variants of the idea that basically amounts to stop trying to take genres that you aren't good at, or genres that not everybody is good at, and water them down into something that anybody can play. Game journalists don't want games that have niche appeal. They don't want games that are difficult and challenging that not everybody can beat just by pressing forward and going through the walking simulator. Games that are meant for everybody often have no sense of identity or appeal. If they appeal to everybody, then there's nothing special about them. Horror games have an appeal. They're scary and they're challenging in some ways because not a lot of people like to be afraid. Even I have difficulty getting through some horror games because I'm scared. But I do it anyway. I like overcoming the obstacle that is my own fear. Games are often applauded as being special and interesting because they have mechanics or facets about their design that won't appeal to the average, ordinary everybody. Games journalists, I suppose, are only allowed to have character in aesthetic ways only. When it comes to gameplay or challenge or the design surrounding those things, it's simply verboten. They don't understand that difficulty is the appeal, and that's why people partake in the challenge at all.